I started out as an underground cartoonist in the pretty late 70s in San Francisco, and stayed in that scene for a fair amount of time until it started to diversify and get a bit less naughty and a bit less angry and a bit less political, and sort of on a tailwind from Ronald Reagan's sort of straw hat career in politics. I worked on a book about why we should hate Ronald Reagan, and then promptly just came over to England and set up in England in 1984. And once I was over here, got some magazine illustration, things like that, and then I got a chance to work on When the Wind Blows, the anti-nuclear film by Raymond Briggs. Well, my dad used to draw when I was very little. He used to sit in the garage downstairs and draw pretty women, sort of 1930s style with all the rainbow coloring and everything. And he wasn't a very happy man, but he was happy when he was doing this. And I got him to show me how to draw when I was pretty small, and then by about the time that I was 8 or so, I had a gigantic carton just full of little stapled picture books, stories and stuff. And I got in trouble in school for doing cartoons and things like that when I was quite little. So I think by age 8 I decided that if I wasn't going to be an artist, I wasn't going to play. So I drew, and I did watercolors and mostly line drawings, I think. I didn't really have any art school training. I just looked at a lot of books, and I found a very nice art teacher when I was in my early 20s who sort of took me under his wing and was particularly interested in me, you know, as a future sort of creator of some sort. And he just fed me a lot of information and just said, you know, respond to it, think about it, be with it every day. It's your major partner. It's got to come before your family, before maybe even your own welfare sometimes, and it's also the second greatest way in the world to go hungry, the first way being a poet. When I was little, it was crayons. A friend of my parents gave me a beautiful watercolor set, which I loved. I wasn't very confident with brushes. Painting was always something I was a bit more frightened about. I mean, I wasn't too afraid of watercolors later on, but I just ended up doing an awful lot of pen and ink drawing. I had a lot of heroes of detail, steel engravers like Doré, or, you know, any of the famous people that most people have seen if they're interested in art. And I just got really lost in detail and texture, and I did everything in black and white texture. I mean, that's a lot of what I was doing in underground comics, not only sort of speaking about my own sexual politics, but also using what I thought were the great classicists in terms of art styles, because it was fine art I always loved, but I also learned to love the freedom of writing down your comments and putting in a story and making a progressive series of events, you know, so you got twice the power. You got the power of the image, you got the power of the language. And of course the English were always the best at political satire and social satire. And very early on, probably when I was about 10, I discovered Ronald Searle, who was, of course, you know, the grandfather of people like Gerald Scarfe and Ralph Steadman and a lot of other artists with a great, wonderful, Baroque, grotesque style that made children even look terrifying. And I thought, you know, this is someone who, with a line, grabs you and takes you right into their gravity field, and you no longer remember what things actually look like. You only start seeing from that person's pen point of view. And so the whole thing, the whole progress of an artist, I guess, is to learn what your gravity is, what your language is, what your force field is, how you can draw others in to see as you see, rather than giving in and seeing as others see. A lot of women didn't even have a language to speak about their personal sexual politics. I mean, writers like, say, Doris Lessing, who was basically sort of jotting down the conversations that she and the other collegiate housewives had where she grew up. I think it was Australia. And so a lot of what women do is in a sort of a diary mode. I mean, Frida Kahlo's paintings, they're about her pain, her disappointment, her obvious appreciation of her own beauty as a young woman, and the fact that she was caged by her pain and by her isolation from Rivera. I mean, this would have been a deeply tragic story if she hadn't been an artist. As it is, it was tragic, and it was beautiful, and it was memorable, and she left behind this beautiful glittering trail of her work that everyone can follow, and made a huge name for herself. She's probably more beloved than Rivera because it was so much harder for her. She was alienated while he was out having a good time. He was imbibing in the world, and she was alone, you know, within the confines of a bed. And yet all that power was there. It's very worrying that there aren't more lively, brave women creators. They got brought into a lot of other duties, and because they didn't stand up for themselves, because they're afraid of being left on the shelf, the whole thing of it, well, if I make a fuss, nobody will marry me. But they don't think about the alternatives. That living life on your own terms is utterly glorious. It makes perfect sense to you, but you have to be willing to let go of everything else. It has to be okay if nobody else likes that. But then when other people see that you're brave and you don't mind, they're fascinated by that, because we all love brave people. We all love it when other people are a bit heroic. We may not give them any support at the time they do it, but we need it. We love it when people do that. I think a lot of the energy that they could put into the world and into putting forward their passions gets sort of locked up into family politics, personal politics, job politics, because women are sort of, they're the meticulous sort of housewives of politesse. And politesse is antithetical to self-expression. Self-expression has to come out pure. It has to have an environment waiting for it. It has to have a garden it can plant itself in. It can't be squeezing itself between people like an unseen lubricant. That's not the quality of art. Yes, there are women, of course there are women British comic artists. I don't think they fare very well. They don't really tend to get much attention. I mean, you've got some very good people in America, but there again, women are not usually, they're not usually the types to think of one-liners. You know, we've got the wonderful Linda Barry in America, and she's fantastic. But again, she's really more of a storytelling person. She's been able to work little quirky endings to her 5-panel pieces. But aside from Marjane Satrapi with Persepolis, which is a hugely important book, and met Alan Moore while I was working on something called Strip Aids, which was a magazine against Clause 28. And then ended up working with Alan Moore on Lost Girls, which took about almost 16 years. And now I'm doing painting, living in Northampton, and still very much with Alan Moore. We'd both been invited to the Café München in London. It was, yeah, we were doing a signing for the Strip Aids book, and we noticed each other, and I think we both listened to each other when we talked. He told me later that he was very familiar with my artwork because he followed the American Undergrounds, which I found quite bizarre because most of the people that I met in my travels there, you know, at least in the animation scene, nobody knew about underground comics in San Francisco.